Good morning. Thanks for your patience. There were some updates that took their own sweet time, so I apologize. To kick things off, we are discussing the Seinfeld episode, the finale. Finale comes in two parts. We will be discussing part one, but of course, if anybody took the opportunity to watch part two and has anything to contribute, we're not going to shut that down. So the finale, Seinfeld, observations.
It was a bit, not difficult, but I only saw the previous episodes that you had assigned. I've never watched the series before. So when they were bringing during the trial, I'm not sure if this is part two, but they were bringing all of the people that they've mistreated and been unkind to. It was funny, but also like I didn't have the context to kind of appreciate like those stories.
Mhm.
But I certainly didn't realize how, I guess, not nice they were.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it was kind of interesting because I feel like Seinfeld is set in New York City, and like my kind of stereotype of the New York City kind of regular person is that they are just kind of like focused on what they're doing, and like whatever is going on around them they don't really care for, and they're kind of in this to get ahead. Like I feel like individually all of these character witnesses, it could have been a one-time thing, but like in succession together kind of like paints the picture of like, as the attorney general is trying to do, like antisocial personality disorder, and like maybe like a big moral failing on their part.
So let's actually take that in two parts. So part one, just a general situation, and you could use New York City or Manhattan as an example here, but a general situation in which an individual is put under some form of stress and has to focus or perhaps even become hypervigilant with regard to completing their task. And whether we define that task as blank or maybe getting through their day, they may actually come off as being withdrawn, emotionally distant, perhaps even self-absorbed, right? And then the teaching point here, which you're not going to actually see on a shelf exam, but certainly is a clinical pearl, is that this would be considered culturally sanctioned, aka normal, right? So we wouldn't pathologize everyone in New York who gets off that subway and looks like they have somewhere to go, even if you ask them a question and they ignore you. Their task is focus, perhaps even hypervigilant, and they require task completion, whatever that might be. Starbucks, getting to work on time, C, D, or E. So it just reinforces, I think, one of the major teaching points, especially when you use film or situational comedy to teach, and that is we're not going to pathologize illness. We are going to always have unconditional positive regard, even with, especially during that initial patient encounter, and regard as the behavior as in the context of some culturally sanctioned norm. Until we get provided information to the contrary, then we will move off this initial point and investigate if there's anything further to do from a clinician's perspective. When we look at this, and by the way, yes, this particular situational comedy is set in Manhattan. So I think it's a great example to bring up because that is the setting for this particular situational comedy, but it is also a show about nothing. And they've said this more than once. And it is as successful as it is because it is a show about nothing. So I'm not so sure we can just sit back and say this is completely normal. And when individuals from your past come up and provide you a mirror into your own behavior, which is what happens in a court case like this, boy, have we moved off that initial point. And we get to this idea that, well, there is a significant degree, and perhaps a clinically significant degree, of egocentrism, there, aka self-absorption here, which of course is a risk factor to develop a personality disorder. So that's the way I actually would go ahead and formulate your observation as terms of what those witnesses represent here. They represent the interactions of these individuals over 9 seasons, over the past decade, and certainly have a very consistent message. And that is a message of egocentrism, which again is normal if age appropriate, but nobody on that stand. None of the individuals who are accused of whatever it is, the charges they're being brought up on, are 2 to 6 years of age. They're well beyond that range or that age range, where this would have been considered that is egocentrism is developmentally appropriate or sanctioned. Right? So that's where I would start this.
As a psychiatrist, so it's like Jerry was your patient and you saw him once and you were observing this court case. And like on the initial encounter, you gave him the benefit of the doubt that his behavior is culturally sanctioned, it's normal. When you hear all of these recounts from the witnesses, obviously like a court case is not the most, they're not bringing forth the most unbiased people about your patient. So like, how does that change? Or does that change like the way that you interpret these statements?
Sure, yeah, potentially, yeah, because remember, these witnesses, if you will, have a parallel in medicine. These are the collateral informants that we contact, family and friends. And if in calling next of kin other, we see that there's like a demographic that is built and therefore perhaps biased, we have to definitely take that into account. And that does happen in medicine. So an individual who is being assessed for testamentary capacity, do they have the capacity to understand what goes into a will? And are they of sound mind to actually furnish their own will? Well, if we reach out to the next of kin who are directly going to be impacted about your medical decision making, yes or no, do they have capacity? We've got to take that into consideration. Right. So again, a wonderful parallel between the comedy itself, certainly the episode we're discussing, and aspects of medicine. Now, remind me, in terms of the particular episode that we watched, weren't there any individuals called to that stand, Mr. and Mrs. Costanza Seinfelds, that were in support of these individuals?
I don't think to a stand. I think someone's mom. George's mom.
Yeah.
His mom.
So, I mean,
His mom like went to the judge, I think.
so, I mean, yes, biased, and I know there's only one character, perhaps within seconds, but in a broader scope, we do have people that perhaps were outside of that bias, even though they're not without their own pathology, which, by the way, again, happens in medicine. When we actually get to informed consent procedures and a psychiatrist is actually consulted to render a medical opinion as to whether the individual has the capacity to provide informed consent. If the answer is no, and a healthcare proxy has to be delegated, it becomes an ethical issue whether if the proxy is deemed to also lack that capacity. So again, another complication, another parallel to medicine.
I had like an experience when I called, like my very first week, and my patient was kind of exhibiting delusions, and I called the wife for collateral, and she also endorsed these delusions. And all of a sudden, I was like, do I trust? Do I even bother like continuing to ask you questions? Like, I automatically was just like less inclined to believe anything that she said. So.
And that's an ethics consult. So again, the individual who received that phone call is not our patient. We do not have a right to render a medical judgment on a patient that we have, or a person that we have not established a physician-patient relationship. However, it's a concern nonetheless, which is why ethics, the division of ethics here, would be brought into that encounter now. All right, what else? What else did you see?
I feel like in that episode, like it had been very promising, like things were going really well. They were going to go to California to make this show. But then like, I feel like once they got on that plane, anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And I realized it's part of what but it was just kind of interesting to see like timing wise, it's the very last episode. We want it to end on a happy note, and this is kind of how it ends.
Yeah.
Not like a stupid mistake, like George trying to get water out of his ears, what like causes them, like derails the whole plan.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, as these characters kind of play out, and of course, the main character is Jerry Seinfeld, the character. Nonetheless, we see the interaction of Jerry's friends, Elaine, Kramer, and George, of course, throughout the entirety of the situational comedy series. And it's George, of all people, that I think has the greatest impact, and maybe in retrospect, always had the greatest impact on the way in which this group goes. because of that seminal scene on that plane, he causes all of this. That said, it is also George, and I wish I could give you the episode and the proper reference here, but in more than one episode, George does bring up that nothing will ever good will happen to him. That if something were to happen, the universe will never allow it. And he's got a very pessimistic, he's not future oriented. He believes that even when presented with something positive, there's a larger plan, and God would never allow him to have this degree of success in his life. And boy, does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And oh boy, isn't that something that has another parallel in medicine, if not psychotherapy? Right? Individuals come in with that negative filter, that cognitive distortion, will have a significant risk factor for anxiety and depression. And of course, George is afflicted with anxiety and depression. And there's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's him, because of the water in his ear, that causes all of this, or at least precipitates it.
Is that self-fulfilling prophecy also a risk factor for personality disorders, or most of?
No, yeah. As a matter of fact, when you're sitting in your non-psychiatric practice, if I haven't convinced you over the past 5 weeks that you're making the wrong decision and you need to pursue psychiatry, you will see your fair degree of personality disorders.
Right.
And although, even when the APA fully gets the cluster A's personalities into the schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorder chapter, you're still going to be left with 7, which is just too much to screen for, too many to screen for during your 20 or 30-minute visit, your office visit. So one of the easier screens is to go back and review how the American Psychiatric Association defines a personality, and then remind yourself how the APA also defines a personality disorder. And the idea here is that there are 4 parts to that definition. That is, a personality is made up of 4 domains, which is good, because when you think back to Freud and Erickson and Jung, etc., you've got to read a chapter to understand what they thought a personality was. The APA puts it in 4 parts for you. Number 1 is cognitions, right? So cognitions are one of those 4, and that gets at your answer. The other 3 are interpersonal functioning, impulse control, and affective stability, the ability or capacity to control one's emotions, right? Once you understand that 4-part definition, which is not easy to remember, a personality disorder then is defined as a deficit in 2 of those 4 spheres. And if your patient sitting across from you coming in with their sore throat, tibia fracture, etc., demonstrates deficits in 2 of those 4 spheres, they have a positive screen. And that's enough for you then to refer to a psychiatrist if you think those deficits are impacting their care or their life/functioning in some way. That's a referral, right? Now, the psychiatrist then will, upon that positive screen, of course, reeval and then investigate any of those 7 conditions that would then make up clusters B and C. So yeah, if an individual continues to process things in a negative way, that's a deficit in cognition. Depends on, and then there are multiple cognitive deficits that, again, are a little bit beyond the scope of our discussion this morning, which probably are not going to appear on your shelf exam.
Yeah, one more thought about George. It seems like his mom is a big influence in like nurture and maybe a little bit of nature and like how he thinks. We talked about like kind of the negative self-talk and like thought process. And his mom, I remember when he goes to tell her like, oh, we're going to California, there's a show. He's like, oh, it's never going to work out. Like she's like, it's a show about nothing. Like, there's no point in making a show like that or something like that.
What message is mom giving him?
And she's like reinforcing the negative thoughts that he has about himself.
Yeah, I mean, the show's about his life. And if the show is about nothing and it's never going to amount to anything, then you as my son will never amount to anything, right? I mean, that's the associative property. I mean, that's the message he's got and has always gotten from his mother. I mean, every episode where the Costanzas, and you bring Frank into this as well, here, they've always messaged the same. And not that this is going to come up on your shelf exam either, but when Young Sheldon premiered, I couldn't believe Larry David did not follow it up, but at least give him a hint that a young George, a prequel to the childhood of George Costanza, would not have been an amazing hit. because of the interactions of an adult George Costanza with his parents. Now, again, the actors and actresses here were phenomenal. So maybe Larry David did consider this and realized he'd never be able to duplicate it with new actors and actresses in terms of, 3 decades, 3.5 decades earlier. But boy, there's a wealth of psychopathology to uncover in George Costanza's childhood.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because it seems like Jordan's parents, seems like from this one episode, because I haven't seen the others, but his dad seems to be of the impression that his mother really kind of drove this negative self-talk. She was like, he was like, you smothered him. And it was maybe that kind of obsessive helicopter parenting that kind of drove George to become the man he is now.
They're definitely enmeshed.
Yeah.
I mean, and Larry David in the contest, really brings us to that level where she literally walks on him and in on him masturbating. By the way, not that it really is demonstrated per DSM criteria, but if George had presented and we understand exactly what it is that we're currently discussing about this character, and let's say the chief complaint was depression and depression that is treatment resistant. What group of disorders must we consider for anxiety and depression that we believe is influenced by enmeshed, overbearing parenting?
Are you talking like a therapy or like a medication or?
A pathology that the character, in this case himself, really doesn't portray, but generically speaking, somebody who presents to you with anxiety and depression, which George does demonstrate, but then really focuses on this enmeshed, overbearing parenting. I'm gonna give you another hint. In a film that I did not assign today, in a film that actually is about this eating disorder. I actually did in the film about this condition, there is a similar scene where the mom does walk in, albeit on her daughter, while she is masturbating. It's anorexia. Yes, anorexia. Yeah. And that's Black Swan, right? So there's actually similar scenes. Seinfeld, the situational comedy, The Contest, and Black Swan, and the mother in each of these is portrayed similarly as the enmeshed, overbearing, intrusive parent. That said, I don't see George as being the male counterpart of Nina. Although, he certainly has some episodes, some scenes within specific Seinfeld episodes where his eating behavior is the focus of the comedy. All right, about 5 minutes left. Any other observations? We're talking about the finale.
I don't know if this is like a psych related thing, but I had always heard my dad talk about the soup Nazi episode. So this was the first time I put a face to who this person was and just saw that brief clip. That was the only kind of interaction that they flashed back on that I didn't think was so bad. The guy seemed like a jerk, and obviously what Elaine did was not nice and made him bankrupt, but that there was at least a little bit of a back and forth, like a conflict between the characters where it wasn't just the friends being jokes for no reason. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. For that episode, and not to go too much on a tangent, this particular character, that's Elaine, simply refused to order her food the way that this particular establishment has their patrons order the food. And it wasn't that she couldn't do it, it's just that upon hearing that she had to do it in order to get her food, her soup, she refused. So there was a significant rigidity there for no reason other than to be rigid. And that led to his bankruptcy. All right, well, I'll leave it here. All of this is the result of a quote unquote Good Samaritan law, which, although is part of medicine, is misinterpreted in this particular episode. It's not exactly the way medical legally we think of the Good Samaritan law in medicine or in psychiatry for that matter. Nonetheless, there's another depiction of that Good Samaritan law that will be discussed this afternoon. So there's the segue to our Night's Watch film, and we'll be back to discuss that at 12 o'clock. So we'll get everybody back then. For everyone who is following on Zoom, we will log on immediately to the next link for our morning rounds. Thank you.